So a couple of weeks ago, I reviewed the Feedback Sports Sprint stand, which is a little bit more of a Euro style bike repair stand, and more than a few of you suggested that I review the Pro Elite model. So I reached out to the folks at Feedback Sports and they sent me a Pro Elite to review and compare to the Sprint stand. So in this video, I'm going to take a look at the Pro Elite's features, what I think after having used both stands for the last couple of weeks, and hopefully it'll help you guys decide which stand is right for you. So check it out in this video. Welcome back, Pathless Peddlers, and if you're new to the channel, if you're looking for information and inspiration about bike travel, bike touring, bike packing, and bike fishing, then definitely subscribe. This channel is for you. So I've been using the Pro Elite the last couple weeks, doing some bike maintenance, upgrading my bikes to tubeless tires, as you saw in the previous video. And I feel like I've gathered all my thoughts and feelings about the Pro Elite stand and the Sprint stand enough so that I can give you guys a sense of what might work for you. So in terms of big broad strokes, the Pro Elite stand is a traditional clamp style stand rather than one that supports the bike from the bottom bracket. It's got a mostly metal construction, aluminum legs, aluminum posts, and some heavier steel or maybe aluminum bits in the actual clamp mechanism itself. In its folded state, it gets about as small as 45 inches, so it's definitely not as compact as the Sprint stand when put away. On our scales, the Pro Elite weighed in at about 12.6 pounds, so definitely a little bit of a hefty bike stand, which is good in terms of providing a nice stable base for working on your bike. Other really standout features on the Pro Elite is adjustable height. I've used other clamp style stands before where it was kind of a fixed height, and it was a bit of a pain when working on the drivetrain because usually I found myself stooping down to turn the cranks and inspect the rear derailleur or front derailleur. But with this, if you're doing a lot of drivetrain work, you can lift up the bike. It's at a little bit more posture friendly and accessible height. Another great feature about this stand in particular is the big red release button. Hit that button and the jaws will automatically open up. And conversely, to put a bike in the stand, you just have to put either the top tube or the seat tube in the jaws and press it together and then tighten it down with the smaller adjustment knob. And speaking of knobs, both the knobs on this stand are heavy duty metal. And it's pretty cool because they have a bit of mass, so when you rotate them, they spin really easily, making it super quick and easy to adjust the rotation of the clamp or to secure a bike on the stand. So that's it for the general features. Let's go into what I like and dislike about the stand and also how I think it compares to the Sprint stand. So the first big like is the metal construction. Yes, it adds weight, but it also makes it a very stable stand and will also provide a lot of durability for long time use, which is awesome because it's not an inexpensive stand. It retails for about 250 bucks, so it's definitely a bit of an investment, but because of the high quality build, you know it's going to last for a number of years. Another big like is that it does give you a wide and reasonable stable base. I'll get into that a little bit further, but for the most part it is wide enough and stable enough to work on your bikes. Another huge like is the quick release button on the jaws. Definitely makes the task of putting a bike on the stand and off the stand a lot quicker and easier, especially if you're dealing with a really heavy bike or an awkwardly shaped bike. And speaking of awkwardly shaped bikes, it does work with all varieties of bikes as long as it's got a seat post or some kind of top tube to clamp onto. So if you got a bike with rack or fenders, it'll work. If you've got a folding bike that doesn't have a standard front quick release axle, then it'll still work on the stand, unlike the Sprint stand. So that's it for the likes. Let's go into the dislikes I have about the Pro Elite repair stand. First big dislike is that it is a large stand even when folded down. With a folded size of about 45 inches, it's definitely a set it up in your garage and leave it there kind of bike stand, rather than the stand that you would kind of casually throw in the back of your car. So if you're looking for a bike stand that you want to take to an event or on the road with you as you travel, then this stand might not be your first choice. Another kind of dislike I have with this stand or this type of stand is that the arm will tend to rotate with really heavy bikes, and especially if you're doing anything that requires any amount of torque on the bike itself. You really have to crank it down so it won't move. I found when I was working on lighter gravel bikes or bikes that didn't have rack and fenders, then it worked perfectly well. But once I started putting on heavier bikes, like our touring bike and especially our mountain bikes, I did have to apply a lot more clamping pressure so the arm wouldn't rotate. And honestly, I think that's a problem of this type of stand in general rather than this particular stand. So that is one thing to consider when choosing a stand like this. And another related dislike is if you are working on heavy bikes, you have to be really conscious of how you place the legs. You want to have one leg jutting out to kind of counteract the tendency of the repair stand to tip over if you have a heavy bike. But personally, I found myself actually just leaving a foot on one of the legs of the stand to kind of help stabilize it. And again, any bike stand with a tripod style leg system is going to face this kind of issue. That's why in bike shops you see stands that are permanently mounted to the ground or placed on a really heavy base. So having used both the Pro Elite stand and the Sprint stand, is there one that is categorically better than the other? I would say no. I feel like they both have their respective strengths, and really depending on how often you're going to use a stand, what you're going to use a stand for, and also the types of bikes that you guys may have, that'll kind of dictate which might be the better stand for you. So this is going to be my recommendations based on having used the two stands last couple weeks. If you have a tendency to need to do really quick repairs, let's say working on your commuter bike just as you go out the door, then the Pro Elite stand is probably the better stand for you. And also if you work on bikes with racks and fenders, or if you have folding bikes or bikes that don't fit the quote-unquote norm, then the Pro Elite is definitely a little bit more versatile than the Sprint stand. But I don't think the Pro Elite is categorically better than the Sprint stand. There are definitely lots of instances where I think I would prefer to use the Sprint stand over the Pro Elite. And the first among them is using it as a travel stand. The Sprint stand just folds down way more smaller than the Pro Elite. So if you've got a van or a car and space is at a premium, then the Sprint stand definitely makes more sense than the Pro Elite. Another instance where I think the Sprint stand excels is if you're doing a long kind of bike building session. Supporting the bike weight from the bottom just seems a lot more stable than clamping to a seat tube or a top tube over the long term. When the bike is being supported from the bottom, there is no risk of anything getting torqued out of place. And especially in terms of working on the cockpit, like wrapping handlebar tape or recabling the front, the Sprint stand is just naturally more stable than the Pro Elite in that respect. Also related to that, I feel like if you have a really heavy bike, a mountain bike, being supported from the bottom also adds to that stability, and you don't have to worry about really clamping down on the clamp arm. And lastly, another instance where I think the Sprint stand really excels is if you're working in a really tight space that has just a single light source. Instead of yourself moving around the bike, you can actually just spin the bike to see it at all angles. So as you can see, choosing between the Pro Elite and the Sprint stand isn't cut and dry. I think it really depends on the nature of the repairs you're going to do, and also kind of the weight of your bikes, and if your bikes work with something like the Sprint stand or if it's better off on something like the Pro Elite. In terms of me personally, for quick and dirty repairs, I do reach for the Pro Elite a lot more than the Sprint stand, but if I'm going to be taking off components and doing recabling, then the Sprint stand is my stand of choice. So what do you guys think? Do you guys have any questions about the Pro Elite or the Sprint stand? I hope this video will hopefully make that decision-making process a little easier about whether you should go for a clamp style stand or something like a Euro style stand. If you guys have any questions, leave those in the comments section below. And if you like this video, found it helpful, you know what to do. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to support original bikey content, be sure to check out the link below, and thanks for watching.